Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. Welcome to another DxO webinar. I am your host, Photo Joseph, today, and I am going to get to take you through one of my favorite Nik collection tools, Silver Efex Pro. I adore Silver Efex. I love black and white. I've been doing photography for kind of a long time, like a wee little tot, and I grew up in my dad's darkroom. And I grew up looking up at the lights and the chemicals and so black and white has always had a really special place in my heart. I've been doing black and white from film days. Yes, I actually did film myself. Let's not talk about how long ago that was. And as soon as I got into digital, I guess probably earliest days of Photoshop, I started playing with black and white. But I remember really, truly rediscovering my love for black and white photography through Silver Efex Pro. Now, you may not be aware of this if you haven't been around for as long as I have, but Silver Efex Pro has been around for a very long time. It is an absolutely superb tool. It was superb from the very beginning and has just gotten better and better and better over the years, over the decades, I suppose it has been quite a while. The Silver Efex Pro is just a phenomenal tool for doing black and white work. Now, we're not going to touch on everything today because there is so much. I mean, truly, I could do an all-day workshop just on Silver Efex Pro, and it's probably still not cover everything. But today we are going to be focusing on cityscapes and using the app to get the most out of a city that you want to turn into a beautiful black and white image. So, but before we dive into the demo, let's do a little bit of quick housekeeping here. As you should be able to see on your screen now, got some slides up. I'm starting off with the title of today's show, if you hadn't already figured this out, using Nik's Silver Efex Pro to create dramatic black and white cityscape images. So we're focusing on black and white, we're focusing on cityscapes. Let's talk about what we're going to be talking about today. I'm just going to read this through real quick. We are going to learn how to get the most out of your cityscape images by converting your color images into black and white masterpieces with Nik Silver Efex. Darkroom-inspired controls will help you create stunning monochrome images. And I want to, before I go into the bullets there, I just want to kind of reiterate something that it mentions here. We're starting with color. And this is a really important part of the digital black and white process. If you think about film, you put black and white film into your camera if you wanted to make black and white pictures. And the nice thing is that you could actually process that at home with a cheap darkroom. It's not like color. Color is like crazy hard to do. But black and white, you could do at home. But then when digital came out, well, all digital is color. Even if you put your camera into black and white mode, you say pick a black and white profile, you're still getting an RGB, red, green, and blue file. Now, it may well be that it's a monochromatic RGB file, but if you were to open that in Photoshop, it is still an RGB file. All the red, green, and blue channels are there. So you could actually kind of recolor, well, let's not get into that. But the important thing to understand is that because you are working with an RGB file, you have an incredible amount of control, frankly, a lot more control than you ever had with black and white film in the darkroom, just because you can access things on the color channels that you just didn't simply have before because they didn't exist on multiple levels. But when you're converting a color file, like RGB file, into black and white, you can do so much with it. You really can just eke out the most as far as contrast and texture and so on goes with it. Now, if you do set your camera to black and white and you shoot a black and white JPEG, then that's all you get is that black and white image. But if you shoot a black and white RAW, but by the way, that JPEG is still an RGB file, but it's just all black and white. But if you shoot an RGB RAW in black and white, when you open that up into any RAW decoder, whether you're talking about Photoshop, or you're talking about Lightroom, or you're talking about wow, my brain is already shutting down for the day. Photolab, which is where we're going to be today. It's been a long morning already. You are looking at a color image. When you first open that file, it's color. And if you've ever been confused by, hold on a second, when I set my camera to black and white and I took a picture, on the back, I saw it in black and white, and then I brought it into your app of choice and it was color, and you're going, what just happened here? That's because the black and white image that you saw in the back of your camera is actually just a embedded JPEG, a little black and white file that is embedded inside of the RAW file. Depending on your camera, that might actually be a full-size JPEG, but regardless, that's all that was. And so what will often happen when you open it up into your editor, whatever it is you're using, you might actually see the black and white image for like a split second, and then it goes to color. And if you've never done that before, you're like, what just happened? Where'd my black and white photo go? That's because the software threw away the JPEG, reprocessed the RAW file from scratch, and said, here you go, here's your RAW file. which is in color. Now, some apps will give you the ability to choose a camera profile and go back to the black and white as you shot it, but essentially you're getting an RGB file, you're getting a color file of it. But again, that does give you ultimate control when it comes to making that black and white. Now, there are black and white digital cameras. Leica makes, are they the only one that makes it? It might be the only one, where they've actually done something in the camera where you'd never get a color file out of it, but it's still an RGB file. It is still an RGB file, even though it is just all black and white, which is pretty wild. Anyway, I just wanted to kind of throw that out there because it talks about converting color images, and I thought maybe that was worth mentioning for anyone out there who might be confused by that process of, I know I shot black and white, why is it in color now? Anyhow, all right, so let's go into the bullets here. So we're going to talk about, I'll just read through these again. Discover the fully redesigned interface with an improved functional design. So we're going to see the new UI of Silver Efex now in the Nik Collection 4. Removing haze using ClearView feature that is now built into Nik Silver Efex. I have an image selected for this where it was shot on a very hazy, smoky, polluted, whatever day, and we're just going to cut through some of that haze like butter. We're going to talk about how to use both global and selective adjustments. This isn't going to be one specific demo. You're going to see this throughout every photo that we work on, but there are both global adjustments where you affect the entire photo, and of course, localized or selective adjustments using the control points. So we're going to get into all of that. Explore some of the new 39 high fidelity black and white film grains. And this is pretty cool because you have these really, really beautiful film grains. And I'm going to show you some things that you may not be aware of, even if you're already working with this, as far as how to integrate the film process presets as well along with the film grains, and how they don't necessarily automatically go together, but you can mix and match them, or of course you can make them the way you want them to. And I see somebody's asking if we're going to be doing selective coloring. We actually will. That's kind of a last moment thing I threw into the presentation today. We are going to be doing selective coloring, so we are going to get to that. Bob's also asking, are you saying you would prefer a color capable camera to a Leica M monochrome or Q2 monochrome? Well, not necessarily. So because I have a special place in my heart for black and white, I do love black and white. Those cameras that shoot only black and white, there's two things about them that make them special. First of all, the fact that you don't have the choice to go to color, it's just it's limiting in the same way that if you go out and shoot with a single prime lens, let's say you go out with a 35mm or a 50mm lens, and that's it. You don't bring a bag full of lenses, that's it. You are forced into this little box, and you have to find your creativity in that little box. And I personally really like working that way. I think it's a very powerful way to force yourself to be more creative. So shooting with a camera that only does black and white will force some of that creativity. But also, what makes those cameras so special isn't just that they're black and white. They have the process of how they do the black and white makes the images sharper, greater, maybe not greater dynamic range, that might not be true, but definitely sharper. There's a certain quality to them that is different from an RGB file that's converted. They're really special. They're also really expensive. I've been asking my friends at Lumix to please make a black and white version of any of the cameras, and they keep going, yeah, that'd be nice, but people don't buy them that much. So of course, it's kind of a chicken and egg, isn't it? I mean, the only ones out there are those Leica ones that are super expensive. But anyway, personally, I would love to have one, but that would definitely be a toy, not a toy. It would be very much a luxury purchase to have something like that. So anyway, so there's that. Okay, those both answered. Let's get into the demos. So I am going to turn off my screen here. You don't need to look at my camera. You don't need to look at me the whole time. I'll bring it back up for the Q&A. Portions, which I will jump into between each photo. You can see we got a selection of photos down here. I'm going to start with this one. This is shot in New York. This is actually on let's just reset this and start this thing over. This was shot on a photo walk that I did for Panasonic a couple years ago after Photo Plus. And so we had a model, and we were out with a group of people. And you can see the first problem with this photo right here is we've got somebody in the frame, and they're actually holding the flash. So you can see that she is being illuminated by a strobe that he's holding here. And that is, making her really stand out against this background in here, which is super fun. So with that in mind, the first thing I want to do is crop this dude out because he just really doesn't belong in the picture. So we're going to do a little bit of work here in Photolab first. I will bring up the crop tool. And remember that when you're cropping, you can choose to maintain your aspect ratio, but that really doesn't work for me here, because if I do that, then I'm going to crop out part of the sky in here, and I really don't want to do that. So I don't care what the final aspect ratio is. So I'm just going to go unconstrained Let's go ahead and get that full height back in there, get the full width on this side and this side as well. And we're just going to crop out just enough to get rid of that dude holding the flash. I'll leave this light in there. I think that's kind of a cool element. It almost, I mean, you could almost believe that this light is illuminating her, except that the light doesn't go the right direction, but that's okay. We're not gonna worry about that. So I think that's a good crop for that. I'm also going to darken her a little bit. Now, this is an important thing to consider. And I actually talk about this a lot when I do these demos. Whenever I'm gonna be spending a significant amount of time in a plugin, doing a lot of work in a plugin. I'm not just doing a quick little quick effect. I'm actually going to really process the photo in there. I want to make sure that I'm sending the best possible image to the filter, because once I leave Photolab here, or if you're in Photoshop or Lightroom, whatever it is, once you leave there, you're no longer in RAW. And I want to do as much as I can to the file while it's in its raw state before I convert it, or commit it, I should say, before I commit it to a TIFF file, before I commit it to fixed pixels. With that in mind, looking at her on here, the flash on her is a little bit too hot, a little bit too bright. So I'm going to scale that down just a little bit. And to do that, I'm going to use the control points that are inside of Photolab. So technically, I could do this inside of Silver Efex or any of the Nik collection, but I want to do this while I'm at the raw level here. So that's where I'm going to start. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and zoom into 1:1 on here. It's always a good idea. Pan over, and you can see she's just a little bit hot, a little bit overexposed on here. I will go into local adjustments, grab a new control point here, and I'm going to drop that right over her there, make that a little bit bigger, and then I'm just going to take the exposure and pull that down a little bit. And that's probably all I need to do. Maybe the highlights down a little bit as well. I don't want to go too much. Pulling down the highlights too much, you can get into this weird solarized look pretty quickly. Do a little before and after comparing there. Yeah, I think that's good. That brings it down a little bit. You still got kind of a, it's solar, maybe bring the exposure up a little bit. There's some kind of strange solarization happening in there. That's I think just something in the original photo, but it's fine. It's going to be fine for this, so we're going to leave it at that. All right, let's zoom back out. And I think that's everything I needed to do to that for corrective work. Everything else I'm going to do inside of inside of Silver Efex. Before I go, one last thing, I do want to look at the histogram though, and this is always a good idea. Look at your histogram and make sure that you're not clipping anything. All right, let's just say, let me go over to exposure. And let's just say, for sake of demo, that the original exposure was darker, like so. And that's, I mean, this actually looks kind of cool, right? It's fine. We've lost all the detail in the building here, but maybe that's fine. But if I look at the histogram, I really have crushed a lot of that. And because I want to have that flexibility, again, let's just say for the sake of argument that this is how the original photo came out. It's just so dark here. I've got so much space here. I would want to bring the exposure up a little bit, stretch out that histogram a little, and give myself a little bit more wiggle room inside of Silver Efex. So that's what I would do had it been underexposed. It wasn't, so we're just going to leave it like that. All right. With that said, let's take it over to the Nik collection. To do that out of Photolab, there's a nice little Nik collection button right there. We click on that. And from here, I'm going to choose Silver Efex. Before I do, let's just check my settings real quick. Always a good idea. By default, it should be set to TIFF and 16-bit, but if for some reason it isn't, again, it's a good idea to go check. You can send a JPEG. I have yet to understand why anyone would want to do that, but you have the option if you do want it. You can send it as a TIFF, or remember there's this option to send the selected file without processing. Now, this is very useful if you are working with a TIFF file that you've already edited and you want to re-edit that same file. You don't want to have Photolab duplicate that as another TIFF, then that's the option that you would want. In this case, though, I can't send the unedited because that would be sending a raw file. And of course, the Nik collection isn't going to take the raw file. You have to first process that with an app like Photolab or Photoshop or whatever you're using. So just to kind of reiterate those points now that we have. All right, so we're going to say export as TIFF. You can choose 8 or 16-bit. There is a good argument to say going into black and white, there probably isn't much point in going to 8-bit, going to 16-bit. I'm just going to leave it at 16 because I always do, and I don't care that the file's a little bit bigger. But if you're concerned about file size, if you're doing black and white, I think you could make a pretty good argument that 8-bit is perfectly fine, but we're going to stay in 16 because I can. All right, so the settings are fine as they are at default. We'll click on the Silver Efex Pro button. The software will render out that TIFF file and then open it up into Silver Efex, which with any luck is going to open on this screen and not the other screen. Oh, there we go. Excellent. It's funny, as I was rehearsing, it kept opening elsewhere. All right, so here we go. Let's get started with Silver Efex Pro. Now, if you If you are not yet familiar with Silver Efex, let me give you a brief tour. And of course, even if you are familiar but you haven't seen the new interface, you are now seeing the new interface. So over on the left-hand side, we have all of our presets. Nothing's moved there. So we have a series of presets in here. They are categorized into, grouped, I should say, into like all presets or kind of a classic presets in there, or would have been qualified as modern presets. Some from that 25th anniversary collection a couple years ago, whenever that was, some nice ones there. The En Vogue collection, that was another collection introduced with a new release. It's kind of nice, actually. These collections of presets, some of these are really, really beautiful. So it's always worth going through and trying those out. And then there's some vintage ones as well, which can be kind of fun. Vintage definitely doesn't apply to this image, but this is where all those presets live, or we just look at all of them. And remember too that you can mark favorites. So if I go through here, let's say, and I go, oh, I really love this low key one. So I click on the little star there, and that adds that as a favorite. And then I'm digging through, and there's these En Vogue, and I go, oh, highlight fade, man, that one's awesome. So I mark that as a favorite as well. So now wherever I am, I can say filter by favorites and only see the favorites that I have in there. Looks like I already had a couple marked as well. You also have this recently used, which is kind of nice. Doesn't look like I have any recently used in here, but let's turn off. There we go. Turn off favorites, turn on recently used, and we'll see those recently used in there as well. It's kind of cool, actually. You can combine them. So show me. So let's mark that one as a favorite. Show me my recently used favorites, and there we go. So you filter them down like so. Let's go ahead and turn those off. So there's all your presets. If you create your own custom presets, those are going to show up down under here under custom presets. So we've got those options. And if you import any presets, those will live down here as well. And that's a really cool thing to point out. You can create your own presets, so those would live under here. And then you can export them. You see a little export button. Nice way to do that. Export the preset, and then you can import those. So this is a great way to move presets over to another system, or to put them up online and share them with friends, or put them out for the community, or you could even sell them if you wanted to. You could do whatever you want there. And then there's a history window down here. It shows you the history of whatever you have done to that photo. On the top, you've got your compare buttons. We haven't done anything here. Let me go ahead and just add something really dramatic like this underexposed preset in here. And now as I do the compare, I can click and hold on this button to do a before and after of the whole image. I can do a split screen before and after, which I can change the position of, and I can even rotate that. So I can do a horizontal or vertical split on there. And then there's the side-by-side comparison, which again, you can rotate with how you want to see that. That makes more sense when you have two vertical images, and putting them like this doesn't make any sense, but there's the option as well. And then your zoom, fit, fill, 1:1, and then this option here changes whatever you last selected. So let's go like a 1:2, half zoom, and there we see that in there. So there's just your zoom positions in there. Let's go back out to fit. On the right-hand side, you have your loop, and this is just showing you a close-up of wherever your mouse is hovering over. And if you want to pin it, you can grab that pin and, like say, drop it on her face on there and make sure that it always stays no matter where I put the mouse, or I can release that pin, and then wherever I put the mouse is what will show up in the loop. Here we have our histogram, and above the histogram is one of my favorite features that we're really not going to get into today, but it is the zone system highlighting in here. This is the zone system taken from the Ansel Adams way of working, and if you want to learn how this whole thing works, I highly encourage you to do this. And a great way to learn this is actually on an older webinar that I did. Probably been a couple years now, but if you go to that webpage I showed you in the beginning, photojoseph.com/DxO or /getDxO, scroll down to the bottom, you'll see a list of all the previous webinars that I did. There's one in there about Silver Efex Pro where I go through the Ansel Adams workflow and really talk about the zone system in there, which is super, super powerful. Again, not going to dive into it here today, but it is a really, really great way to do black and white images. Just FYI, one of those things you might want to consider. All right, anyway, so let's see here going on. We got our histogram, and then we get into our global adjustments here. And I'm gonna collapse all of these real quick just to kind of clean this up. I'm on a pretty low resolution screen right now here for the sake of the demo. So it's easier to collapse all these, but obviously on a bigger screen, you could leave more of these open and not get too confused of where things are. But just to run through this list, at the top, you have your global adjustments, which are, as you might imagine, adjustments that apply to the whole image. So if I take my brightness slider or whatever, that's going to affect the brightness of the entire image there all at once. Then you've got your selective adjustments, and we'll be spending time in here with control points. And as soon as I add a control point, we're going to have all the adjustments of that control point under here. Then you've got your ClearView slider. That's something we talked about in the slides, and I will be showing that in another demo. Color filters. Now, if you're not familiar with this idea, when you're shooting black and white film photography, and you can do this with digital, but when you're shooting black and white film, you could put a colored piece of glass over the camera, and that would allow you to limit or enhance specific color spectrums coming in to make them lighter or darker. which is always a really fun way to work in black and white. Then you've got your film types, and this is where we get into the meticulously recreated film types. And you can see here, just as I scroll through them, how just watching the curves in here, how the curves are represented by these different film types. So each one of these film types is being mimicked using a combination of settings, including the curve of how that's represented in there, the sensitivity of various colors, and so on. So a lot of really cool stuff happens in here under the film type slider, film types adjuster. Then you get into film grain, and this is one of the big new features in here where you have all these different film grains that you can choose from. And here's the wild thing, and I'm going to point this out now, and we'll get into it again in a little bit, but the film grains in here have a partial overlap. They're not a complete identical set, but they have a partial overlap with the film types. Now the film types actually have their own grain in here, but this is a generic grain. So what you can do is, if you find a film type that you really like, you can use its default grain in here, or you can take the grain all the way, that would be all the way off, take the grain per pixel all the way up to the max, and that makes that grain it essentially removes it, it makes it invisible. And then go down here and add a film grain from one of the meticulously recreated film grain representations. So each one of these film grain representations are created very, very carefully. I've got to say, they're very carefully created by closely analyzing scans of real film. So at DxO, they took all these different film stocks and they scanned the film with super high resolution scanners, and then very carefully recreated the look of that film, the pattern, the structure of it, the frequency of it, and so on, to recreate that to give you that look in here. And so you have all these different film grains that you can use, and it may seem like well, so what, for film grain is film grain, but when you really get into it and you start looking closely, they do have different characteristics to them that some you just like better than others. It's never right or wrong when it comes to this sort of thing. It's just what you like better than others. And you can find film grains that you just absolutely adore, and some that you think they don't look very good, and that's perfectly fine. So again, no right or wrong, but here's the cool point, is that you can choose a film grain that matches a film transfer process, what do we call it on here? The film look, the film types. So you can choose a film grain that matches the film type or not. You can mix and match them. You can take a Kodak film type that recreates the kind of film gamma curve and the color representation of that film stock, and then add a film grain from an Ilford film or an Agfa film or whatever you like on there. It's pretty cool, the flexibility that you got. Can't do that in the darkroom. That much I can tell you. All right, moving on. Let's see here. So there's that, and then the last selection here, where was I? Let me close this. The last selection here is finishing adjustments, and under here we find things like toning, vignetting, burning the edges, adding borders to it, and so on. We're going to get into a whole bunch of this stuff. So with all that said, what am I going to do with this picture? So I've already did the control point on her face to darken it a little bit when I brought her in. I'm going to reset this back to its natural or neutral state there, so it's just as it is. And the first thing I want to do is add some structure to this. I love adding structure to buildings and especially to sky. So let's go up to global adjustments, and I'll find my structure slider. Here it is. And I'm going to take this, I'm going to crank it up. In fact, let's just take it up to 100 to see what happens. Taking it up to 100, we get really nice definition in the buildings in there. The sky has definitely amplified a bit. That's looking pretty good. It might be a bit too strong. Let's back it off a little bit. But what's happened to her? Let's zoom in close to her. And as we're going to see on her face, structure is not doing her any favors. This is not a good look. It has just kind of over sharpened it, really amplified every little crease or wrinkle or whatever. It's definitely not looking good. So I want to add structure to the whole photo except on her. So I'm going to use, and we're already jumping into some advanced work here, but I'm going to use on her a control point. So let's hide the global adjustments, and let me go to my control points here under selective adjustments. I'm going to grab a control point and drop it under her face. And let's make this a little bit smaller here. And before I do anything to it, let's see what is being affected by this control point. The best way to do that is to click on this little mask icon here. And now I can see what is being affected. So the front kind of highlighter part of her face, or the more shadow part, or is it really her hair and the dark shadows behind her, or the stripes on her shirt? Well, I don't want to affect just one part. I really want to affect this whole region in here. So here's one of the most exciting new tools inside of Silver Efex Pro, and that is with the selective adjustment loaded, I can take these color selectivity sliders and I can constrict, so basically constrain, maybe that's a better word, or expand the range of what is being affected by that control point. This is incredibly powerful. So if I wanted to just get a particular part of her face, for example, I could really narrow this down to do exactly that. However, I want to go the opposite direction. I want to affect everything in this region. So I'm going to take it down to 0. Both luminance and chrominance are set to 0. And I'll even make this a little bit smaller here. And so now I'm affecting this whole area here in a nice, big, soft type of a radial gradient effect. Okay, but what am I actually doing? Well, I haven't done anything to it yet. So let's go down here, and I'm going to take my structure. Where's that? I'm going to take my structure, there it is, and I'm going to counteract the structure that I added in the global adjustments. So under global, I brought my structure up to 73%, and we can see what it's done to her face. It's awful, right? Okay, so now let's go down here and take the structure, and I'm going to go negative 73%. So let's counteract exactly what I did in the beginning. And come on, we get 73. It's always going to be that way. It's 73. Come on, you get it right on. There it is. Perfect. 73%. Now watch this. I'm going to do a compare before and after. And notice how her face is totally untouched, but we can see the effect of the structure around it. So if you ever want to counteract something that you've applied globally, just add a control point, set the opposite settings in there, and that's exactly what's going to happen in there. So now I've got this really cool effect where I have added the structure to the whole image except on her. Pretty awesome. Now I can do the same thing with, let's say, exposure. Let's go up to the exposure, brightness, we'll use brightness for this. Pull the brightness down, and remember this is global, so that's set the brightness to the whole image. She is getting darker there, but if I wanted to counteract that, I could go set the brightness on her up to plus 19%, and it would counteract that. But pretty neat way to work. Okay, so I'm gonna put this back where it was, and I want to now add a little bit more structure into the sky, into the clouds. I think that the clouds could use some really dramatic emphasis on there. So I will scroll down, grab the control point, drop one onto the clouds in there. Let's make it really big. Let's take a look at what's being affected. Turn that on, and there we go. We can see that we are getting a nice selection of the clouds, very little of the buildings. Now, I am getting this part of the buildings. I could use the refinement tools to try and restrict that and really just get the sky. But let's think about this for a minute. What am I seeing right here? It's reflections, right? This is a reflection of the clouds. So if I'm going to make a change to the clouds, I kind of want that to show up in the reflections as well. It'll look more natural that way. So I'm just going to leave this as it is, which I think is kind of cool. Let's also go down here and rename these. So if I was doing a really big project, I could rename the control points. So we'll call that one clouds. I remember this one on here was face, and obviously you can call them whatever you want, but that allows us to keep track of all the control points. Not so important with when you only have 2 of them, but if you created dozens, that would be a pretty important thing to have. Okay, so I've got that. Let's hide that view. And now with that control point selected, let's go back down here, and I'm going to find the structure, and I'm going to take the structure. So same thing I did globally. I'm going to take the structure and really crank it up even more. So we're kind of doubling it up, if you will, on the clouds in there. Then I'll take my amplify blacks and really crank that up, make that a little bit more contrasty, maybe bring the whites up as well, basically adding contrast into that. We're getting this really cool looking sky in there. I dig it. I think that's a kind of a fun effect overall. Maybe one more thing I want to do is add a little vignetting overall to the image. So let's do that. I'll scroll down to the finishing adjustments, look for vignetting. There it is. And I have presets in here that I can choose from. So you can run through the presets if you want to, or what I'll do instead is just take the amount slider here and let's do a little bit of darkening around the whole image. And I can change the shape of that vignette if I wanted to, the overall size of it, but I just want to add a little bit, not a whole lot, just add a little bit of vignette in there. I like it. So there we go. I've got this image where I first cropped out the fellow that was over here holding the flash, and then oh yeah, right, I darkened her just to protect the highlights on her in the original image before I brought it into Silver Efex Pro. Then I added the structure to the whole image, but then removed it over her face, and then added even more structure onto the clouds, and of course enhanced it even further by adjusting the black and the white points in there. So I like it. I'm going to hit apply. Actually, before I hit apply, just in case I want to use this later, I'm going to click on save this as a preset. We'll call this what do we call this? Photo walk New York City. And I'm also going to save it with the control point. So I could easily reapply this same look to the same photo, or even to another photo if I wanted to, along with those control points. So we'll save that onto there. Cool. All right, let's apply that, render that out, and let that go in. Now, while that is happening, let's turn the camera back on and take a look at the questions. Someone has asked, does the Silver Efex output maintain all the color data? So no, it's still going to be an RGB file, but the color is gone. The color, it'd be like having a black and white JPEG where the red, green, and blue channels are effectively the same, and so we are removing all of that color view on there. So that's what happens. So no, we can't recolor the image, if you will, once you leave it. But you do have access to the color data when you're in Silver Efex Pro, which we are going to look at later, and you can access that through the selective colorization. Okay, Raphael says, what about the DPI? You use 72 for resolution. Isn't it better to use a bigger one, say 300 DPI? Okay, great question. So what he's talking about is in the output settings. So let's go to my next photo is going to be this one here. Load up, there we go. I'm not going to start it yet. I still have more work I want to do in here, but I'm going to go into the settings, and this is what he was talking about, this resolution. So this is a topic that I think that confuses a lot of people, and it's a very important topic to understand. Resolution, DPI or PPI, dots per inch or pixels per inch, is only relevant when you're printing. When you're looking at the image on screen, it is 100% irrelevant. Here's what I mean by this. Let's make the numbers easy. Let's say that your camera shoots 1,000 by 1,000 pixel image. Obviously it doesn't, but let's just say that's the resolution of your camera, 1,000 by 1,000. 1,000 pixels by 1,000 pixels is your base file. Now, if I go to print that picture, if I set that 1,000 by 1,000 image to 100 pixels or dots per inch, DPI or PPI, then when it prints, it's going to be 10 by 10 inches. 10 inches at 100 each, 10 by 100 is 1,000, right? So there's that 1,000. Now, if I print that same image at 1,000 PPI, then it is going to be a 1 by 1 inch print. Same number of pixels. We did not add pixels. We did not remove pixels. We still have 1,000 by 1,000 pixels. The representation of how many dots or pixels per inch only matters when you go to print it. When you're looking at it on screen, whether you have it set to 1 DPI or a million DPI, it is still that original 1,000 by 1,000 pixels. So it just doesn't matter. It only matters when you go to print. Now, even with that said, let's say that I was going to output this for print, but I'm just going to send the full resolution file to a printer. I'm not printing it at home. I'm sending it off to a professional printer. And I know that I want an 8 by 10 out of the image. I'm not going to make a decision to reduce the resolution by outputting only an 8 by 10 at 100 DPI or whatever I determine is what's right for their printer, which is data that they could provide for you. They could say the output should be at 133 DPI or 266 or whatever they might say. I wouldn't do that. I would let the printer make that choice, because the printer, the printing company, they know their hardware best, and I would give them all the pixels that I've got and let them make a decision of how they want to structure that for that final print. So the only time this is ever something that I would need to play with is if I'm printing at home, which I never do. But if you were printing at home, then it would matter, but only again for that final output, not for this stage of the process. You can change that at any time. It doesn't matter. And again, as long as you're on screen, it's irrelevant. So I hope that answers your question. Let's move on. All right, let's see here. There's one more question that came up. I'll go do this one before we jump into the next photo. Is there a workflow, this is from Hans, is there a workflow you can recommend for best results? For example, first the brightness, second contrast, third structure, and so on. This is the beauty of working with an app like Photolab, or same thing in Lightroom, where all of those adjustments that you make to the raw file, being that they're non-destructive, it doesn't matter what order you do them in. You can do them in any number of order and go back and change them any number of times. Everything is recalculated every time you adjust a slider. So if I take my one slider up to 100, another one down to minus 100, and then I go back and I take that other one back down to 0, you are not brightening and then darkening the pixels, just as an easy example. You're not brightening it and then darkening it. You are telling the software to render this brighter, and then you're saying, actually, no, render it back at its default position. Every time you adjust a slider, the whole process goes to the beginning and it runs through the entire series of adjustments that you've set. This is why when we were in Silver Efex there, we were able to adjust the structure for the whole image and then counter it with the local adjustment, because that plus 100 minus 1, or whatever it was, what I have, like plus 73 and then minus 73 equals 0, obviously. And the software goes, oh, for this part of the image, do nothing. And that's how that works. So it doesn't matter the order that you do it in. Now, is there a proper order just to kind of, just for your own workflow as far as ease of getting through it? I would usually start with exposure, get my exposure down where I want it, at least get it within range, and then start making other tweaks, because if you're looking at an over or underexposed image, it's kind of hard to do anything else properly. But you might find that, let's say, forget black and white for a second, let's say you're doing color. Let's say that you adjust the exposure, and let's use curves. You adjust curves and then you adjust saturation. Well, you might decide after you adjust the saturation that the curves need to change, or the other way around. If you adjust the saturation and then you adjust the curves, that may end up oversaturating the image, so you have to pull the saturation back down. That's totally fine. So you may be going back and forth, but if anything, I would probably start with exposure just because that's the most obvious, and then just dive in from there. But you can always go back and make changes at any time. I hope that helps. Okay, let's move on now. Let's turn off the camera and let's escape out of here. Where's escape? There we go. And let's work on this photo. Okay, so this is the photo where I'm going to be using the what do you call it? The ClearView to get rid of some of this haze in here. Now in Photolab we have ClearView in here, right? I do have ClearView in Photolab. I don't remember where it is. I can go up here and type it. There it is, ClearView. I can take that and crank that up, and I can really cut through a lot of that haze. But I'm not going to do it here. I'm going to do this in Silver Efex Pro itself, because I don't know how much of this I really do and don't want to reduce, and I don't want to make that decision until I've seen it in black and white. So I'm not going to do that in here. What I am going to do in here, though, is crop this pretty heavily, because I don't like all this stuff in the foreground. So I'm going to, once again, go unconstrained, and let's just get rid of all this stuff in the foreground here. I'm going to make a very kind of wide cinematic look in here and really just focus on the cluster of buildings back there. I think that's all I'm really going to do in there. Yeah, that works pretty good. So let's just close that. And looking at my histogram, I'm not clipping anything. I could definitely expand out the range in here if I wanted to. So I could go in and let's say, let's see here, let's go into, where's my color adjustment series, go selective tones. I could take my shadows down or up, and maybe let's take the black point down. Actually, let's do that. Stretch out the black point a little bit, add a little bit of contrast in that way. And maybe, you know, for the sake of argument, you could probably say that it's better to do this here while you're in the raw file. So yeah, I'm going to do that. Stretch that out a little bit, get some of that contrast in there, but we definitely still need that clear view. So yeah, I'm gonna start with this. I think this works. Okay, let's work with this. All right, Nik collection button, click on Silver Efex Pro, render out that TIFF file, and in we go. So first thing I am going to hit in here, once we're in Silver Efex, is that clear view, because I do want to see how much of this haze I can cut through. And then of course, as we were just discussing, I'll be able to go back and readjust that at any time, totally non-destructively. Okay, let's see here. Where are we? Clear view. Scroll down. There's clear view. It's got its own category here. Let's take the intensity of that up a little bit, or a whole lot. And as you can see, we can really start to amplify that and really make that just cut through that haze and look a lot better. So just a little before and after right there. You can see a really dramatic improvement. It might be a little bit much on the background there. You know, I'll back that off just a hair, but that's looking pretty good. I kind of like the way that looks. Okay, good. All right, well, that's the first thing done. I like that. Where do I want to go next with this image? What direction do I want to take this photo? Again, we've got all these presets, right? I can start going through the presets and trying those, but this time I want to play with the film types. I'm going to use that as a way to explore different looks. So let me just hide everything here just because it makes it a little easier to see what's going on. In fact, I'll hide all of this stuff. And let's go down to film types. There we go. And let's have a play. Under film types, once again, you have a bunch of different film types to choose from. As you get to use these, you'll start to become familiar with the ones that you prefer. And I know which ones I tend to like. I really tend to lean towards the Kodak ones. It's just something that it's a look that I've come to love. But no right or wrong answer in here. You just go through and find something that you like the look of. And each one of these that I choose, let me just grab one at random here. You can see again that curve like I was talking about earlier. This is a gamma response curve effectively. It's how are the shadows and the highlights treated by this film? How are blue colors and red colors treated by this film? Well, in the the laboratory analysis of, what is this, Rolly Retro 100 tonal film, it was determined that the red sensitivity is dropped down to about -34%. If I drag this up and down, let's see, in this photo, we are seeing the effect of a more or less sensitive red. And I can go in here and change it however I like. I go, I like the overall look, but I really wish my red, what was originally red, is a little bit brighter, so I can pull that up. Or you know what, actually, I want it even darker. The blues, I don't know if there's a whole lot of blue in this photo, but let's see. Oh, there was, yeah, that's right, there was quite a bit of blue. So I can increase or decrease the sensitivity of the blue in here. All of these sliders are effectively making up what this particular film stock looks like in the real world. And so again, that's all these are, is presets of all these different responses. So something like this, let's go to this Kodak 400 T-Max. You'll see here, because of the way this is curved, that tells us that T-Max 400 really emphasized the highlights and really crushed the shadows quite a bit, actually. Look, we've got a full shadow crush happening here, and then pulling the shadows down into darkness, and then the highlights rolling up into a brighter highlight. And you can see that in the image. It's a very high contrast. The shadow detail is largely crushed and lost in here. My highlights have gotten very, very bright, and that is what that film stock looks like. But you go, that's cool and all, but I don't want my shadows quite that dark. So let's just change it, because you have that total flexibility to do. So I actually quite like it. I'm gonna go ahead and put that back. I like that kind of crushy, darker film in there. Now I do want to get that grain look, and we can see the grain already happening. Let's go into 1:1, go up to the sky. It's nice and it's easy to see on a big flat area like this. And it's okay. That's a pretty good looking film grain. We can see what it is over here. Grain per pixel set at 235 and so on. But we're not using the true Kodak film grain. So let's do that instead. I'm going to take this and get rid of it. I'm going to take this all the way up to 500, which effectively eliminates let's set this back to 0 as well, which effectively eliminates the film grain added by this. And now let's go down to the film grain and choose a totally different film grade to add on top of this. Now, if I want it to match, I can scroll down and find my Kodak. Let's see here, Kodak T-Max 400, there it is. Add that one in there. And you can see that film grain, if I toggle just that on and off, is very, very subtle. It's a very subtle grain. Honestly, I don't know if that's even coming through for you on the GoToWebinar screen, but that is a very subtle film grain, but maybe I want it to be a little bit more intense. So let's crank up the intensity of that a little bit. I can do that. I can even change the grain size. I can make it more pronounced if that's what I want. But whatever decision I make, obviously it's up to me, it's totally creative, but this does allow me to really control, really manipulate how that film grain looks. And I think this looks quite beautiful, actually. I quite like that one. So I'm gonna go with that. By the way, just a point to make, I always make this point, but whenever you're playing with grain, you really should be looking at it at 100%. You want to zoom into 100% while you're playing with the grain, so you can truly see what that is going to look like. And when you're done, of course, you can pop that out. Okay, so let's do something else. What else do I want to do to this? Let's try vignetting. I want to add a little bit of vignetting to this image here, kind of darken the edges a little bit, maybe darken that sky. So let's do that. Under the finishing, go down to vignetting, and let's take this down a little bit. Oh, yeah, actually, no, that really doesn't work, does it? You get this huge circle vignette around the edges, nothing on the top. That's not gonna do it. I can't control the shape of the vignette. Let's go more towards rectangle. All right, now we're getting better. We're getting that top vignette, but it's just too much on the sides. So instead of vignetting, what I will do, let's reset that, is I'm going to use this thing here called burn edges. This allows me to, well, with the presets, I can burn all the edges, and you can see how that goes, which is largely a vignette. But the real power here is choosing which side you want to burn, the top, left, bottom, or right. So let's go for the top. And I'm going to start by taking the strength up pretty strong. And you can see it's a very narrow band of burning on there. Let's make that a bit bigger. And I'm also going to take that transition and make that as wide as it is. So now I have this big, soft burn transition on here. And now let's dial the size back and take the strength back a bit. And I just want to add a little bit of darkness to the sky. Not a whole lot, just a kiss of it, right about so. Now if I toggle that on and off, it's actually that's more than I thought. Let's back that off a little bit more. Incidentally, there's a great point to make. It's always a good idea to toggle on and off what you've done to see exactly what you've done, to really compare that one particular look. So notice I'm not doing a compare of the whole thing, right? That obviously you can do that as well. But in this case, I just want to see what those finishing adjustments look like. So good idea to toggle that on and off and make that decision. I like that. Okay, cool. So that's excellent. I think this is coming along nicely. One more thing. I'm just going to one more thing to this. I'm going to go to my image borders here and add one of these borders. I kind of like these. I mean, they're maybe a little bit cheesy, but I kind of like them. They're kind of fun. So a bunch of different cool ones in here. I'm going to go for this type 6. I like this kind of jagged edge on there. I can actually increase the size of that to make it so that it's, or decrease the size, just so it's barely kissing the edge of that. And I don't know. I kind of like it. I think it's kind of a fun effect. So I'm going to stick with this one. I'm going to hit apply and render that out. All right, let's jump back over to the questions real quick, see what else has popped up here. Michelle has asked, how can you stop the haloing, for example, between the building and the skies when adding Silver Efex filters? So haloing generally comes from overdoing things like structure. And so there's a couple things you can do. You can just back off on the structure. You can also go in with control points and isolate where the structure is, or perhaps even go in on a very fine edge and add more to counteract that transition where you might be getting some weird fall off. It comes because you have overdone a slider, but sometimes you need to overdo it because you want to add that effect to that area, and that's just how you want it. So you would go back in there and either isolate where it's being added to, so you restrict where that effect is being added, or go to the areas where you're getting that weird effect and either protect it or counteract it like we did with the structure on the girl's face. So that would be the approach to that. There's no one easy answer. You really have to play with it, but that is the effective approach to it. Alice asks, would you ever do ClearView before the other adjustments? If you mean inside of Photolab, because ClearView is now part of Silver Efex Pro, I wouldn't specifically for Silver Efex, but for any other tool, then I would go ahead and do that first. And then of course, once you're in Silver Efex, it really is a case of just playing with it. I mean, I could have gone back into that ClearView and undone some of that, maybe backed it off a little bit if it was a bit too strong. So again, because it's totally non-destructive, as long as you're in there, you can go back and forth all day long and make the changes to it. But I think it came out pretty good that way. Philippe says, is there a way to see the color and the black white pictures at the same time? Not side by side, but what you can do, I'll show you this in a moment. You can just move the Nik plugin out of the way, or Command Tab over to, or Control Tab, whatever, over to Photolab or wherever you started and see the color image there. So you could do it that way. But within the plugin itself, within Silver Efex Pro itself, you can't just show the full color image. Okay, let's see here. Moving on, we're going to, all right, next photo is this one here. All right, let's turn the camera back off and load this picture. This is Rome, and this is shot a long time ago. This is, let's see here, shot on a Canon 20D in 2015. This is an old one. So pretty low resolution, and as we're going to see as we zoom in here, it's pretty noisy in there. That's okay. It's still a good picture, I think. The white balance is totally wrong, which I don't care about because I'm going black and white, but I just want to show you something in here. It's kind of fun. There's a couple things I'm going to show you about this file that are a bit unique, and just in case you run into these things, this white balance is, I mean, I don't even know what kind of lighting this was, right? So setting was as shot, the camera, the 15-year-old camera when I shot it, just didn't auto balance that thing very well at all. If I go through the different presets, I already know that like fluorescent and tungsten just aren't going to do it. So that's not going to work. And trying to do this manually, like find the right balance on there, it's definitely going to be a bit tricky in here. So you really need a custom white balance card, but I don't have one in here. So kind of what you would normally do, let's go back to as shot, is just click around and try and find something that gives you that right look. You know, I grab the eyedropper and I can go off the cloud, and that's actually not too shabby in there. That's a pretty decent white balance. Maybe a little bit cool, but if I was trying to make it look natural, that would be a way. Click on the building. Ooh, that's definitely not it. Click on this guy's hood. I swear I just never saw that guy walking by. Nope, that definitely didn't do it. Click on the kind of this white wall in the background. Oh, well, that actually works pretty well. So just to drive this point home, even though this has nothing to do with black and white, it can be, it's interesting when you grab that eyedropper and you start clicking around different parts of the image, you just might find a good spot to do the white balance from. So just a little tip in there for you. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is export this out, try to export this out, and it's not going to work. Let me show you why. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to say, go to Silver Efex. And I get this dialog that says ambiguity processing limitations. And it says at least one image in the batch. Well, I only have one image. So the one image contains a DxO module ambiguity. Several different DxO modules can be used to correct these images. So what does this mean? What is this telling me? Well, remember that within Photolab, every photo gets a DxO module applied to it. The DxO module is a custom module for that camera and lens combination that says this particular camera model with this particular lens has been profiled to require these corrections. Photolab is going to apply those corrections to the image. Cool. The problem here, the reason there's an ambiguity, is because the software, Photolab, isn't quite sure what lens was used. And the reason for that is this is such an old file that the lens's metadata wasn't fully stored in the file. If we look at the metadata, let's cancel this, look at the metadata in here, you'll see actually very little. It says nothing about the lens. That's just honestly kind of odd. It should at least have some information, but it doesn't. It doesn't tell me anything about the lens in there. Thanks, boss. So if I can't see it here, then the software certainly doesn't know what it is. It was a 14 millimeter, but that's all it knows. So it is guessing what that is, but it doesn't know yet. Now it's saying, this dialog is saying, I could just go ahead and proceed, and it'll just render it as it is in this kind of generic, but it really wants me to pick the right lens. Well, I know what lens I shot it with. So I'm gonna go down here and click on, see this little icon, the camera with the little magnifying glass in it? And even actually cancel that. If I hover over it, a little pop-up says an ambiguity between the DxO optics modules has been detected. So I click on this and it lets me choose. So first it says none of these lenses, automatic optical corrections will be disabled. But I can go through here and I go, oh, well, this was shot with the 14 mil. It knew it was 14 mil, but it could have been any one of these 5 14 millimeter lenses. Well, I know that I did not own a Samyang or a Sigma, but I did own a Canon 14 f2.8. Now, there's 2 of those. There's a version 2 and a version 1. I know I never owned the version 2, and this is a 15-year-old photo anyway, so it must be this one. So I select that, and now we'll see a slight difference in the correction of the picture. You might have seen that pop up, and now I have the accurate correction applied to it. So let's go ahead now and render this off as a TIFF into Silver Efex Pro so that I can do my magic to this photo. Now, I'm going to jump into here. And I'm going to start playing with the presets again, because I think it's just a great way to start. Just kind of click on a few presets and it's like, they look way too dark on there. High contrast, ooh, that's kind of cool, but it's way too high contrast. High structure, ooh, actually kind of like that. Kind of like the high structure in here, but, let's zoom in close. Man, this image is messed up. This is just so crunchy to begin with. If I back out of here, we see it's just, there's so much noise. Look at all this noise in the sky in there. You know, I want to get rid of a lot of that. I want to get rid of that, and I want to get rid of it before I go into Silver Efex Pro. So let me back out of here. I'm going to cancel this. And because I'm starting in Photolab, that does mean that I can go over here and I can go to my prime noise reduction, and I can take this and add deep prime to this. So let's put a, actually previews right there is fine. We can see the preview in here. Let's take a look at the difference between high quality and deep prime reduction. I go to deep prime and look at how much cleaner this is. Look at the difference in here between these two of how much cleaner that is. All that noise removed out of the sky. Even this looks sharper, cleaner, more detail into it. So I'm going to have that enabled, and now I'll go back into the Silver Efex Pro. It's going to, it's already created that TIFF, so I'm going to say just go ahead and overwrite the one that I just created because I didn't actually do anything with it. And now we're going to get that that in there. Let's turn that camera back off. All right, so opened up. I knew it was going to happen one of these days. It opened up on the wrong window. All right, so now when I look at this, let's go back to that same preset, that high structure preset, and now look at how much better this looks. Now we're seeing this image looking so much better than it did before, and we're definitely off to a better start in here. I like this approach. So what else do I want to do to this? Let's back out of here. Again, I've already applied this preset, this high structure one. Maybe I want to darken the sky a little bit. Let's do that next. So let's make that a little bit darker. Let's go to my control points. Let's hide these 2 things. Go to selective adjustments, grab a control point, drop that onto the clouds in there. As always, I want to take a look at exactly what's going to be affected. So, you know, that's getting a little bit more than I want. I don't want to darken the building in here. So perfect reason to use the color selectivity. Let's reduce the luminance and chrominance. That's the one that's going to do it. Reduce the chrominance selection on there, and we'll get that into place, and there we go. And now with that selected, we can go in and darken that down. Let's pull that brightness down on there and make that a little bit more dramatic looking pretty cool in there. All right, I'm just going to darken that a little bit and apply that one. That's all I'm going to do to this photo, because we are running out of time, and there is one more thing that I do want to show, especially since somebody asked about it, and that was the selective colorization. So I'm going to go to this photo next, and here we go, load that up, there we go. There's that photo. We're gonna bring this one up next. This is in Chicago. This was shot with an adapted lens, so there's no lens information at all on this photo, so no optical correction is gonna get applied. That's all right. We're gonna take this into Silver Efex Pro, and I'm gonna do 2 things. I'm going to apply a preset to kind of really amplify this slightly washed out, hazy look that I've got in here. And let's see here. I'm going to, out of the interest of time, I'm going to just jump straight to the preset that I know that I want. It is number 21 down here. Where are we? There we go. This one called Triste, which I guess it means sad in some languages. So I don't know if that was the intention here, but that's what we're going with. So there we've got this, we're kind of slightly washed out, faded black look that I think is just, it looks kind of cool for this. But I want to pull some color out of this light on the wall in there. So somebody had asked about seeing the other version of the photo. I can just move this and I can see the color version in the background there, or I can Command Tab over to Photolab and I can see that, so I can go back and forth between them. But no, within Silver Efex itself, you can't see the color version. But again, easy enough to do. But let's go ahead and bring some of the color back into that. So I'm going to go to my control points. I'm going to drop one not on the light. Well, let's drop it on the light itself to start, and we'll show you why that doesn't work. You can see here that is, let's go ahead and zoom in 1-to-1 in here. The mask that I have created with that control point is just on that light, so that's not what I want. I'm going to grab the area around that, and I could actually add a second control point. We'll just Option drag that over, but it's actually not going to be necessary, so I'll delete that one. We just have this control point here because it's not going to be necessary, because I'm not going to selectively adjust it. I'm going to take the luminance on this and chrominance and bring this all the way down on the sliders to get a very simple generic radial gradient on there. So now that that's applied, let's hide that and zoom back out to see the whole thing. Now I can go down to Selective Colorization, and I'll just bring it all the way up to begin with. And then we can just maybe make it a little bit bigger, get that kind of orange glow happening in there, maybe back it off a little bit much on there, so we can do something like that. I'll do one more. I'm going to add Selective Colorization to, let me Command Tab back over to the original file, to the red edges of this sign in here. So I will add another control point. Let's just add a control point right onto the red. Once again, we can see exactly what's being selected. So I just want that red in there. Let's make this a little bit bigger on there. I could reduce the effect of that by adjusting the luminance and chrominance sliders in there. And let's just move that down to here. I'm going to Option drag that up to expand that to another part of the image. Maybe really reduce that a little bit more in there. And about so, that's looking pretty good. And then let's take those two, group those together. So I can select both of them and group them, and then treat them as a whole, and take the Selective Adjustment and drag that up and pull some of that red back into the image. And of course, I could continue to expand that, do more of them on there if I wanted to get more of that red in there. But that's the basic idea. That is how that selective colorization works. All right, I'm just going to do that. I'm going to add one more control point up here, do one more at the top, and kind of pull that back in. There we go. That's kind of cool. I mean, you know, it's a look, right? It is a look. It is an option. It is a thing that you can do. All right, a few more questions popped up, and we are out of time, but I will answer these questions. Then we got to wrap this thing up. Frank says, or Frank, do you need to turn on the option to save changes to TIFF to make it non-destructive? I had to be able to get back and make additional adjustments. Also, scroll. Oops. Oh no. Also, shoot. Sorry. Also, what happens if you save changes but go to another plugin? Okay. So what he's asking about is this non-destructive edits. I didn't talk about it at all in today's demo, but down here you have this option to enable non-destructive edits. What that is doing, and this is something that was introduced in the previous version of the Nik collection, it is saving a multi-layered TIFF file where you have the original image and the altered image, and all the metadata in how that image was made is saved into the file. So if you reopen that into Silver Efex Pro again, you will actually be able to pick up where you left off, which is really, really awesome. Now, what happens if you open that same file into another plugin? That is lost. You can't have multiple, you can't have the metadata from multiple different plugins stored in a single file. That doesn't work. So it's once you go to another one, you lose that. So if you do need to go to another one, then it's a good idea to duplicate that to make a complete new copy of that file so you have the original one still intact. Okay, Bobby says, this is gonna be the last question here. Bobby says, the film grain looks like noise. Can you explain why film visible grain is desirable? Absolutely, that's a great question. Okay. Digital noise has a very different structure and look than grain. Digital noise tends to look artificial. Grain tends to look natural, looks organic. And that is that's the desirable look in here, is to make it look organic. Why would you want to do this? Well, sometimes it's just a case of you like the way it looks. I personally am a huge fan of film grain. Maybe it's because I started in film. Maybe it's just a throwback thing. I refuse to let go of my youth. I don't know. But I like film grain. I don't like the image to be so perfectly crisp and sharp that it looks digital. I don't like it to look that clean and sharp. It feels too crisp. I use a word that you could even consider derogatory towards some people's photos, but I feel that it's soulless. I feel like it's lacking soul when it doesn't have any film grain added to it at all. It's just too crisp and clean. So I personally, total personal decision, I like to add a little bit of film grain, just a touch, just a little bit, just a little bit. It just takes that digital edge off of the photo. Now, if you want to get even more, it might be, really, really emphasize the grain. That could be because you're trying to mimic the look of a high ISO film, or it could be because you're trying to hide digital noise. So digital noise looks like digital noise, especially to the trained eye. It looks like digital noise, whereas film grain feels more natural and organic. So what people will often do, and I've done this a million times myself, is before having tools like prime noise reduction that really, really eliminated a lot of the noise, I would use heavy grain to hide noise. Because when you add heavy grain on top of noise, it disguises the noise to look like grain, and it looks better. Now that we have really good noise reduction, I can still eliminate most of it, but then quite often that no longer feels right to eliminate all this noise where there kind of feels like there should be because it was a dark image. So then I would add a little bit of grain back on top of it to kind of compensate for that, but to again make it look, in my opinion, more natural and real. So that's why. I hope that answers that question. It is largely personal and even philosophical, but that is why it's there and what the differences are. So there we go. Thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in today. I do appreciate you as always. Take care of yourselves. We'll see you next time.